Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the Artist Index and sponsored in part by our friends at Heavenly Spirits Imports. And I know it sounds like an old, like I'm beating the same drum all the time. Every guest is special, yes, but this one is especially special because they're a category buster and they're helping us to achieve something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. And I don't really know how to go about it because when we started this thing, we wanted to do contemporary artists. Now, contemporary is just a weird kind of a term that people use. They think, oh, it means modern. No, contemporary means now. So you could have been contemporary 100 years, 200 years ago, because that's when you existed. And so it's not modern, it's now. And the reason why we use that term is because we had another side to this concept, and that's historic artists. Because oddly enough, if we were to just say it as we mean it, we'd be talking about living artists, of which our guest is one and has been a guest on our show, and dead artists. And that's what we're kind of excited about, because our guest is going to introduce our first dead artist. Okay, so with that in mind, I'll let the guests introduce themselves as I always do. You know the routine: spell your name, sit up straight, shut off your phone.
I'm Maki Mark Carvalho, also known as Boston Maki, Maki. Markcarvalho.
Excellent. And thanks for bringing us this gift. I mean, we talked about this, I think, it was like on that auspicious weekend where my whole artistic life changed from being an abstract artist to selling that one whaling painting and then going in the direction I'm going in. That's when I first met you. You had a booth, a couple of booths over from us. And then you told me about your great uncle or grand uncle?
Great uncle.
Great uncle. Okay. So I'm going to let you just take it away, because this is for history. This is really resurrecting him. And we are working in collaboration with the New Bedford Whaling Museum's Common Ground Project, which means that your podcast and all the podcasts that we're going to do in now and forever are all going to be archived in the Whaling Museum's database forever and ever. Or as Michael Lapides, who's heading up the Common Ground Project, along with Naomi Slip. It sounds awful. I just slipped on that one. Naomi Slip. She's taken over for Akea de Barros Gomes, Dr. Akea de Barros Gomes. And as Michael likes to say, it's going to be in perpetuity. So like Father Guido Sarducci used to say forever and ever, and he would say, but I think forever kind of covers it.
Yeah.
So tell us about your great uncle and, relationships and all that other stuff.
His name was Nicholas Yellenti, spelled Yellenti. He was, the beginning story is a little unclear. I've heard that he was born in Philadelphia. I heard that he and his mother went to Philadelphia and then moved to New Bedford. And then that's when he started an apprenticeship with, the name was Clarence E. Braley. And I guess he swept his floors and the guy taught him art. and then went on to the Swain School of Design and graduated in 1918. Went on to start doing scenic design for theaters in New Bedford, and then kind of caught the bug with that, moved off to New York, where he painted scenes on Broadway for pretty much all of the 20s. And then around 1929, he was going to move to the Bahamas because he fell in love there, but World War II started to happen, and he ended up moving out to Hollywood. And from there, he picked up set design, did a lot of set designs for, most notable one was The Jazz Singer, which is like a famous movie for, it's the first movie with sound, but spent a long career out there painting. And when he crossed my path was around like in his 90s. It was probably like 1984 to like 1986 is where I remember him. And he had moved back home to New Bedford to live with one of his sisters and continued to paint. And I actually have a cool article about him from the Standard Times from July 23rd, 1984. So I remember him as I was probably like, 6, 7 years old. And my mother, we would have him, to the parties and things, but I think it was at the Melville Towers. And I remember seeing him actually paint. And I remember him handing me a brush and my mother telling him, "Oh, this is my little artist." So kind of like that's the crossover there. Kind of a neat memory, but he was like very hunched over. He was in his 90s by then. And but he was still painting. And I had a sort of little like almost flashback one day. I was living on Purchase Street and I was driving by the Melville Towers. And I could picture that view from the windows facing Fairhaven. And that was one of the, I'm almost positive that was where the area he was actually painting. I'd love to find out if that was true or not.
Yeah, well, it's funny how memory gets fuzzy, and believe it or not, it gets fuzzier as you get older sometimes.
Yeah.
But where does he fit in your family? Is he on your mom's side, your dad's side?
Yeah, I was on my mother's side. The
What
Cataldos.
The what?
The Cataldos, who were my grandfather was the selectman of Fairhaven for many years, and then Healy, and then Yellenti's.
Okay, so this is interesting. Cataldo is Portuguese, right?
It's Italian.
It is Italian. Okay, it's Italian. Yellenti is Italian as well?
Yep.
Okay.
So that's the other thing. I'm not sure if he came from Italy or not. If he was born in Italy and then came over with his mother, or if he was born in Philadelphia.
Right. And then Healy rings a bell because one of the people I want to get on this show, God rest his soul, is an old friend of mine. I used to see him every Saturday when I go food shopping. Milton Healy. He was an artist. He was a graphic designer. Yeah, he passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. And I worked with a Deborah Healy, who was a painter who just about, let's see, I worked for Tony Souza for the Office of Historic Preservation. She was on our team. And I think it was somewhere within a couple of years of working for City Hall that her career just took off as a painter. I mean, she just skyrocketed, and I haven't seen her in years. And I always was curious if she was related to Milton. If you have any information on Milton, come on back.
Okay.
All right. Cataldo, I do remember. And Cataldo is one of those words too. It could be Portuguese, it could be Italian. Yeah. In fact, there's Betancourts, there's Sylvia. There's a whole bunch of Portuguese names in a certain part of Italy, which is kind of interesting. But then again, the Portuguese were everywhere. So he's on your mom's side, and it's got to be really cool, obviously, that connection to see someone in the family. It must have been jaw drop for you you're already an aspiring artist at what, 7?
Yeah.
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 Right.
Yeah. Right.
And then to see this man, and I mean, Al Jolson and the Jazz Singer, come on. I mean, that is a classic. That is
Yeah. Right.
on so many levels, because it's Al Jolson, and because it was the first talkie. Wow, that's phenomenal. What else do you remember about him? Because do you have any photographs of him? Because I tried looking for them and I
I
couldn't
do.
find anything.
I mean, I just have some articles. Will this be on the podcast? Do you have video?
Sure,
No?
yeah. If you can scan that and send it over to me, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is right behind me, right here. Oh,
The gentleman with the palette?
Yep, that's him.
Okay. That's him too. I was wondering.
Yeah, that's
Wow,
probably him and in like his like 60s.
Okay. Now, how long was he in the city for?
Boy, I don't know. So I think he grew up in the city from a young age to at least like 18, 19.
Yeah.
And then it was right around the 20s or so. And, he worked in New Bedford and then decided to move up to New York.
Well, that's where everything was.
Yeah.
I mean, Carl Simmons, who I will eventually drag his butt onto this show, kicking and screaming. We've been talking about kidnapping him, but he would be drooling, and he's going to drool when he hears this particular podcast, because there's so much here that is going to trigger him off. You said he did set designs for the local theater, so we'd be assuming that would be the Empire, the Olympia, the Orpheum.
It was hold on here. It was Lester Lonigan and the theatrical impresario at the Old Hathaway Theater.
Ooh, the Old Hathaway Theater.
Yeah, that's what this article says. Yeah,
totally drawing a blank on that one, but Carl would be the guy who would know. Yeah. And so, when did he? Do you know of any of? Did he hit Broadway, or did he do straight theater, or in New York? Or
yeah, he was on Broadway. He did. I have some of his set designs here. Of like this was for Earl Carroll. And I know he did. Real
quick, that looks like the Wizard of Oz. A passing glance.
These are crazy. What I find that's because my family. I let them know I want to preserve this artwork. It's not about money or anything like that. I would never sell any of them. I want them to be preserved. And it's kind of neat. Like I'm starting to get more and more things, but it's all like periods of his life, like I have set designs and like the early drawings for some of those things. Some are labeled, some aren't. Paintings from, the 50s when he was out in California. I have things that were later on in his life too. So it's, and even the beginning when he was like probably 18, 19, I have a few local paintings that he did. I think it was of one of the rocks at Horseneck, and then one of a house on the Acushnet River. So for me, like that's kind of neat, just piecing together his artistic life,
Is he in the Mary Jean Blasdale's Directory of New Bedford Artists?
I'm not sure.
That would be interesting. Number one. Number two, the Whaling Museum, if they don't know about him, wow, they would freak. This is an incredible discovery. Because he went from theater, which would be straight theater, Broadway. He went into movies. Now, how late did he work on films? Set designs in film, into the 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe.
Yeah, I think he was probably out there for a better part of maybe 20, 30 years.
Do you remember any of the productions that he worked on? I guess if you go to IMDb, you might be able to find something on him.
Yeah, through a couple articles. One of them, there was The Jazz Singer, and the other one that was noted was called White Cargo.
White Cargo.
Yeah, I haven't looked that up yet.
All right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That might be one of those really.
It actually says in this article that he worked on some 125 Broadway productions, working with a bunch of different directors. So that's quite a bit.
Yeah, it certainly is. That's certainly impressive. I mean, I wish my old senior English teacher who got me into theater as a set designer was around so that we could ask him. Because his dad, Tom Higgins' dad, I don't know what his father's name was, but he was a rigger. He's the guy that ran all the rigging in on the stage, and pretty much, the story, like, he was born in the backstage of the Strand or some, those classic theater stories and such.
Yeah.
When what would you like? What would you like? I mean, other than the family preserving his legacy, which, is going to entail some legal things, you have to create a trust and all that other stuff. But other than the family, how about for the public? I mean, what do you foresee? What's your wish for his legacy?
I mean, I think it would be great to, if maybe seeing if anybody else has some of his work, to be able to see those things, and then maybe eventually, as these things come together, excuse me, maybe have a nice little show somewhere of his work, or maybe side by side of even his work and my work, because that might be interesting with like landscapes and things like that, some kind of like my off things that I don't normally do, to be able to show those. And or I would just be happy just to be able to show his work somewhere again, because I always think about like the idea of his legacy, my legacy, those things, but like what will happen with my artwork in the end. I hope that a family member takes enough interest like I am that would want to collect those things, so it could be interesting where some of those thoughts could actually go.
Yeah, I've mentioned it several times on several podcasts about artist estates, and Dr. Richard Connor handles two major estates and a couple of I don't want to say minor, but three other estates. When I say minor, they're smaller estates. He doesn't have the volume that he does of the other two larger ones. The mid-century, and as this generation of artists, well, not this one, that generation of artists who were active in the 50s, they've already passed on. God knows what's ended up in the dumpster or bonfire,
or is still
something. Yeah, they're still floating around. I mean, I just did some quick research on your great uncle. And there's a lot of his work still in auction houses and such. So there's a lot of documentation, which is better than nothing.
Yeah.
So that really is something that, at some point we're going to really have to investigate on the show, even a podcast that is more instructional or whatever, because there's something called a catalog raisonné, and they're more popular, to use that term, popular, more well-known, more utilized in Europe. When your work hits the secondary market, if you're not in that catalog raisonné, they have no provenance, they have no idea who the heck you are. So right. They don't want to handle your work because they don't know who you are, what it's worth, so on and so forth. So I think, especially now, I'm starting to catalog my own work just for giggles. Also, it's not just pedantic OCD Virgo stuff, but it's also helping me, seeing my own journey as I've gone along over the years. You brought up an interesting point about your great uncle. Wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody listening to this podcast contacted you and said, "Hey, guess what I've got?" And now you see another of his pieces. That's got to be very cool.
Yeah.
We've had that happen. I never realized that Jack Wolf, I went to Bridgewater State University to sniff around looking for adjunct work, for teaching. And I walked into the gallery and there was this massive painting, 10 by 20 feet or probably bigger, massive painting. And it was of African-American people. They were hanging around on a stoop in Roxbury, and I thought the artist was black. I had no idea it was a white guy, but it was just so taken by it. It was more expressionist, but yet there was a character to each one. Each person was a character. They just weren't thrown up there as figures. So they were lovingly, created. Long story short, comes to find out, he was a guy who made it really, really big. He was part of the Boston Expressionists, and he just soured on the whole art business and said they're nothing but a bunch of bloodsuckers. And he just left New York and came back to his studio in Stoughton and painted there till the last days of his life. I went to go visit his widow, and I was like, wow, this guy was hot during his lifetime, and then he became a recluse. And she's got these massive paintings in the studio. Long story short, between her efforts and that of her daughter and son-in-law, and oddly enough, a woman in California who's a curator at a gallery, heard the podcast that I did, and she contacted them, and he's having a retrospective in California.
Oh, wow.
So he's back on the books again,
Yeah.
So I guess it's like living twice, For
sure. Yeah.
Because we don't think about immortality when we're working. We're just thinking about, it's a art problem. You're trying to find a solution. You're trying to challenge yourself, or you're saying, okay, hope this thing sells. I got to pay the mortgage.
Right, but
Right.
Then when you do sell something, it's in somebody else's hands. And
Exactly.
you hope that they take care of your work, because I've heard nightmare stories of like people seeing their work in dumpsters and things like that. And like, I guess that's just the nature of the beast, right? What will survive?
Yeah. Dr. Connor contacted me. I think I was living in Portugal at the time. And he said, is this your work? I'm like, gee, it looks a lot like my work. He said, I think it's your work. I said, well, where the heck did you find that? He says, because he checks the auctions almost every day. He says, this isn't an auction. It came out of an estate in Miami. So I did a little bit of invent. I said, that's my work.
No kidding.
Yeah. So you just really
it was labeled under your name?
It said artist unknown, but I forgot how we figured out that it was indeed my work. I had given something to their PBS station, because we all got hit up as graduate students, and it went. Somebody bought it and went into, in their home. It had been there for like 40 something years. They passed away and they were liquidating the estate, and there it was. So you just never really know where stuff is going to pop up,
Yeah. Properly label your stuff.
Yes. And Henry Harper, if you're listening to this, yes, I know you've told me that a million times because he's an antiquarian. He runs a gallery in Detroit, and he's always telling the young artists, sign the damn piece. He says, I hate it when I get a gorgeous piece of work and I'm looking at it, and it's like, I have no idea who the heck did this. I don't know if I'm holding a masterpiece, because the name does make a difference. Or,
of course.
So what are the memories that you have of him?
Oh, boy. I mean, he was very old when I met him. He was in his 90s to probably 91, 92.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember him just like always, very friendly person. But I'll never forget that, him handing me that brush in the studio and my mother just being, no, this is my little artist. I'll never forget that. It's so impressive, too, to think about like you could just tell his body was just beat, he was completely hunched over, barely could walk. I remember like the little shuffle, but the guy still had an easel in front of him and still had paint and was still pushing that brush around, That's amazing to me.
Yeah, it's almost like that. It's almost like the Sistine Chapel where, the spark of life where God is that touching the finger of Adam,
Yeah,
where him
right.
handing that paintbrush to you was like zap, there you go. That's so cool. What's the rest of the family think about him? And your mom's memories and
Everybody,
little things.
they loved him. He ended up living with my aunt Anne for a while.
Mhm.
But that's the nice thing too, is like, it opens up some communication of some other things, like, just talking to them about, oh yeah, Uncle Nick gave me this around this, but he was very generous around the whole family of, everybody had one of his paintings or multiple of his paintings hanging in the house. I think that's great, because that's kind of how I approach it too. I love doing, making a painting for somebody in the family, and kind of dropping that. So who knows, like, how things might repeat in my life, eventually. But yeah, they all love his paintings, but I also think that they realize sometimes, okay, maybe it's time to kind of preserve these a little more, and maybe I can preserve those a little more. I guess too, but one of my aunts just told me that she found some of his old backdrops for some of the theaters. So I haven't seen those yet. I'll be getting those pretty soon and checking those out. But I think everybody just loves the artwork, and some of the stuff is over 100 years old, and it's still hanging on our walls.
Yeah, at some point you got to get into the nuts and bolts, the practicalities of it, and get it appraised, especially for insurance purposes, because it's just a little bit more than sentimental value. And that's another thing too, is this all the stuff that they don't teach us in school. We start getting into this other area of art that we have no idea about. Auctions, appraisals, estates.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of fascinated by it, because there are people who, yes, have become more well known after their death. A lot of good it does you, really, but they become more known after their death. And there are other people. I mean, I know all of my instructors who were selling work. They were successful. They're not just faculty members, making a salary, but they were in galleries and so on and so forth, and they're gone, and poof, I've looked up some of them. I can't find a darn thing on them. And that was one of the ideas for getting this show on the roll. There's another thing about you're talking about your great uncle. Have you thought of creating a website or something to get his work out there? I mean, just as many images as you're willing to give us to put onto this podcast post. And of course, all this information is going to go into the museum, into the Whaling Museum. And I will also speak to Naomi and Michael at the Whaling Museum about him, because who knows, they may know nothing about that he even existed.
Yeah.
And he may be one of. Was that?
One of the other things would be outcomes is, I'm sure I would love to donate some of the pieces there for a collection or something, because I think that's another avenue that some of this stuff should be kept in a museum, because just for the longevity of it as well,
the conservation of it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there's something like a perpetual loan, where it's still yours, but it's not yours, kind of thing. It's this nether thing, but it's the responsibility of the museum, and and they take it on as part of their collection. I know that was the thought that I had before that slipped out. Do you ever feel his presence around you when you're painting?
I can't say that I have, but have I thought about it like retroactively? Yes. Like thinking about some of the places he's been and things, you know what I mean? Like, I think about that stuff a lot, like even just because, living in New Bedford almost my whole life, being in some of those same areas, my studio was my great grandfather. He worked there, 100 years before me, and I found that out. And then
What did he do?
I don't know if he worked on the looms. I'm not sure. Yeah. But he worked in the Kilburn Mill, and then I found that out, and like going back there, it's like you wonder, did your footsteps land in the same place that their footsteps landed? Is this an area that he had a conversation or something?
Right. No, I've never met my father-in-law, Dr. Batchelor. Dr. Batchelor was a sculptor. He started off in college as an art student and was asked to go into the School of Medicine. And I've got a pastel that's looking down on me that he did when he was 14 years old, I think it is. Incredibly apt, well handled. And without even thinking about it, I'd be working down in the studio, especially when I started that new work that I started, which somebody's got to label it for me. I call it social expressionism because it deals with some pretty tough subject matter, race and so on and so forth. And sometimes I just feel like he's like right in the studio. And I decided, okay, I took a shot of this pastel, shrunk it down, and I hang it next to my easel. I said, if you're going to be here, you're going to be here, and I don't know. I mean, when you're working, what kind of things run through your mind? I mean, you've got your great uncle looking down on you with his palette. And it's interesting what he's doing with his hand. What's he doing with his
he has
left
a brush
hand?
in his hands.
That is a brush?
That is a brush, yeah. Right.
Okay,
here.
It's very hard to see. Okay, yeah.
It is an awkward position for the hand.
Yeah.
So that could, who knows? Maybe that's some like Dan Brown symbolism.
You just never know. And you know what? He looks a little bit like Bill Kendall.
He does look like Bill Kendall.
No, right? You're gonna take a shot of that and show it to Bill Kendall.
Funny.
I was like, there's something so familiar about that guy. Now it's starting to come out.
Yeah.
Let's, if we could, just for a bit, get off of, and this is a little choppy because again, it's like brand new territory. I'm like, half my brain screaming, I can't believe I'm actually doing this, and the other half is going, what the hell are you doing? So now Milt Healy, how do you know Milt? Because I don't want to let that pass by. How do you?
Milt worked at Horseneck Beach, correct?
No, that's Milt Brightman.
Oh, Brightman, you're right.
Brightman,
right.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah,
Milt Healy, as far as I remember, and this is another investigation I've got to do. I believe it was Mars Bargain Land. They had an art department there because they did all those newspaper ads, and there was a bunch of people there. I believe Steve Cook was one of them before he went over to SEA, Southeastern Advertising, in downtown New Bedford with another Milt George, and working with Ralph Hickok, who was also on this podcast. And there was a gentleman of color, I believe his name was Tom McCoy, who was the manager, if I remember correctly, which is kind of interesting for a couple of reasons. He's a manager, number one, okay? And then Milt said his working there was his work day, like they'd come in with a box of shoes, put it next to his desk, his drawing table, and what he had to do is with pen and ink, draw every one of those shoes. Because photography was expensive.
Sure.
For to do Ben Day or halftone, for the newspaper. It was very, very expensive. So they would do all hard line. So these guys were artists in their own rights, but what they did is they did production graphics to put food on the table.
Yeah, that's wild.
So when you said Milt Healy, because Milt Healy also, I don't know if you ever remember going to Whites of Westport when they had the murals before they did a lot of the redecorating, but they had these massive wall murals of the Priscilla, the steamboat lines, the Fall River.
I think I do remember that.
Milt did all of those. and he did murals like all over the place. So part of this journey is to uncover these people, to resurrect them, and give them, the breath of life again.
Yeah, and I think what you said too about that finding different ways to document their life and their work is important, because you never know how long a painting is going to survive, or a watercolor that he has is going to survive, So like thinking about that, it's almost like dip your toe in every water, right? Like you should have, I should have an Instagram for him where I'm doing scans of his work and putting that stuff up, because that might be the only thing that ends up surviving, right? Or, you think about all the different things and how vulnerable each one is. You can put it on your flash drive if you want and hang on to that, but there's no guarantee that flash drive. And so, you always got to be kind of progressing and putting it in different spots. And then hopefully as everything goes, more and more things survive, or whatever.
Oh, it also attracts, what is it, that the theory of magnetism or whatever the heck it is. Well, look at Jack Wolf. I mean, it's so great, because I really didn't think about him until a couple of weeks ago as being the first step, the first tick of the clock, so to speak, that moved me over from abstract to what I'm doing now, because I was so taken by his work. I mean, really kind of moved by what he did, and then, if you do put your great uncle's work up there, Nicholas Yellenti's work out there, you never know what it's going to trigger off, because that's what I mean. There's a lot of bad about social media, but there's also a lot of good as well.
Oh, for
and
sure.
You never know. People like, hey, I've had this in my garage, blah, 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 blah. Would you like it? Or, or stories. There may be other relatives or people that worked with him, or, that were younger, obviously, and can relate stories to him. You just really, really never know.
It's funny. A lot of that stuff too, it makes me think of, the Vivian Myers story, the photographer.
Vivian Myers.
You haven't seen that documentary, Ron. You gotta watch that documentary.
Okay, I gotta write this down. Yep.
Vivian.
Oh, wait a minute. Vivian Myers, not the artwork in the trunk. She's her great aunt is the one who actually invented white line block printing. That one?
No. Vivian Meyer was so her stuff was discovered in a storage locker, like an enormous amount of incredible photographs from, I believe, the 40s to the 50s. And this guy just bought this box of her stuff and discovered these. I mean, they're amazing photographs. Could things just catch fire one day, and then all of a sudden you find out that all of his work is all over the place? I mean, that would be amazing,
Well, yeah. And it's funny because what I do is I scour Netflix and Amazon, Prime Video, to try to find anything about artists. I mean, I've watched so many shows. It's like, a lot of it's a blur.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely correct. There are discoveries that just trigger things off. There was one that they made a discovery in the New Bedford Public Library. I think I may have been working for Tony Souza at the time. Imagine finding negatives that required a bomb squad to get them out of the building.
What?
They were nitrate. It was nitrate film, and that stuff could go up. Like, it could catch at any moment. And now that you reminded me, I'm wondering whose work was that, and where is it now? But yeah, I'm thinking of Francisco Raposa, who was my art teacher at Dartmouth High. He was an instructor at the Swain at one time. And I think he was also a production artist working for those with Milton Healy and Tom McCoy and others. And I really think it's really, really, really important, because if we don't treat them with reverence, how do we expect anyone to treat us with any reverence?
For sure. Yeah, it's kind of paying one forward,
Yeah.
I
You
I
have
would
a
love.
daughter, correct?
No, I don't. No,
You
no
don't.
kids.
Okay. No kids. Who was that? That was you were in Sintra, that photograph.
Oh, that's my girlfriend.
That's your girlfriend. Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I thought she was a daughter for some reason. I don't know why.
Oh, no.
So okay, so say you end up getting married or whatever, okay, or long-term relationship, and you pass before she does.
Yeah.
She's going to be left with joy, sorrow, and grief. And then she's going to have that moment like, what do I do with all this stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Well, she's an artist. Well, she's not working as an artist right now, but she went to UMass Dartmouth to be an artist. So she knows how much it's important to me, you know?
Yeah.
I would hope she would take the proper steps, but it's a very interesting thing to think about. Like, yeah, what would happen? Should I entrust it to one person and like you almost have like, part of a will, or I'm not sure.
Here's a trailer load of stuff. Thanks a
Yeah, here
lot.
we go.
See you in the
go.
afterlife.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like, well, you just leave it up for grabs, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of intriguing.
What are you going to do with all yours?
I was thinking the other day, well, I haven't been able to go back to Portugal because of the pandemic. My mom just turned 95 on Monday. She's still healthy. And I'm like, oh, please, let me have inherited her genes, which I think I may have, because, the DNA says I'm 99.8% Iberian.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I look like her. So there's got to be something there, but there's no guarantees, right? But really, I've got maybe 100 pieces of work left in Portugal.
Wow.
That I'd love to sell, obviously, because shipping them here. I had 20 pieces of work that I shipped from Portugal to Germany for a show, and then from Germany over to here, and that cost a bundle.
Oh, I'm sure.
But as you go along in life, you put something away, entrust it to somebody, and then you totally forget about it.
Yeah.
And then years later, somebody's like, check this out.
Yeah. 100 works. That's
Yeah. Well, working in abstract, it's a different kind of a pace.
Yeah.
It wasn't banging it out with like, oh, look at me, I can smudge this canvas and ooh, that's done. Aren't I clever? No, it was just at that point in my life, I just had the opportunity to do nothing but paint all day, which was fantastic. Going back to your great uncle, any living relatives, anybody who provided you with any anecdotes about him, is any legendary kind of things that you haven't been able to prove or disprove?
No, not really, to be honest.
Did he ever marry?
I believe he did marry, and then he had one daughter at one point. I don't really know what happened with that whole story, though. When he went away to California to live in Hollywood, and then he was in Santa Cruz, I think, for a while. I don't think he had much contact with the family. I mean, he really couldn't back then either. That was very tough. So he was just kind of out there.
Yeah, it was very expensive. Yeah.
I know he had 2 sisters, and I'm sure he kept in contact with them. But so, yeah, I guess there is a little bit of a mystery there that I'm still trying to kind of piece together.
Yeah. Yeah. If and I usually use this, what I call one of the Barbara Walter questions at the very end of I probably did it to you in your podcast. If you had a magic wand, okay, and you could use it to get the answer directly or indirectly, what one question would you want to know? What was that one thing that you would like to know about him? You know what I'm saying? I
would like to know what inspired him first to paint. because I think about that transition, like you said, like the passing of the thing over. It wasn't anything, a big moment like that. It was just an artist handing a little kid a paintbrush, but I still think of that stuff now as an artist, and I would love to know what was first sparked him to maybe go and do that, or if he had a moment like that he remembers at a young age and that could pass on.
Yeah, I mean, you just flashed a memory. I mean, I've talked for years that the first 6 or 7 years of my life, I grew up in New York when my mother left my dad, and she moved to New York to live with her uncle there. And I just remember now they had boarders. A lot of people still did that to get by. It was a hangover from the Depression. And there was a German boarder, and when you said that, it's like, whoa. He smoked Viceroy cigarettes. Why I remember that, I don't know. And he said to me in broken English, if you're going to be an artist, now I have to be 5 or 6 years old. I don't know how this came about. If you're going to be an artist, you have to have the proper tools. And I know he gave me paper, but the one thing I remember were the turquoise set of pencils, the Faber-Castells. And every time I see those pencils to this day, okay, I think of him. But the moment, like right now, at this particular point, it was like, wow,
Yeah.
We were just talking on, just having a conversation with somebody. I forgot if it was on a podcast or whatever. And it was like, experience and exposure is so important. I've had the privilege of speaking to so many artists on this show, and some of them have had mothers and fathers who are artists. So one of them or both of them were artists, and they never like shoved it down their throat, so to speak. They just grew up in that atmosphere, and it was like, okay, I'm going to be an artist. Why? Because it's like a natural thing. Or having a family member who was very, very interested in art, had an incredible art collection. And it's just by that exposure alone, it rubs off on you, How did it rub off on you? I know you probably mentioned this in your own podcast, but I just want to try to tie it together to your great great uncle.
How did he?
No, you. How do you think it rubbed off on you before you even were conscious of this guy, right? I mean, because your mom says, "Here's my little artist." What got you to the point of being the little artist?
I really don't know, because except for like exposed to his stuff, I mean, it was just pure interest. I loved cartoons as a very young kid, and like that fascinated me. But I do remember, being at a super young age, trying to draw my Vavoo. And I actually have a portrait upstairs when I was like 10 years old, trying to draw him. And even before that, like, I don't know what has always made me want to try and make something that I saw on TV or something like that. I can't explain it.
It's just part of your DNA, just part of your wiring in your head, you think? Or
I guess, yeah, I'm kind of a very visual like learner, and like I don't know, because literally, except for him, my mother's into crafts and things like that. It just always sparked an interest to me to kind of make something out of nothing.
Was there anybody else in the family beside him that you can think of or remember?
No, I mean, my aunt Roseanne is also like kind of into crafts. I remember her doing scrimshaw as a kid. And I thought that was pretty neat. But besides that, no, nobody.
So now here's the question, because we're going to be we're winding down. We still have time, but we're winding down. If he were still alive right now, there's so many questions, my God, I could ask you in this vein that I'm this direction I'm going in. Well, let me ask you this first one. If he was still alive, how confident would you be showing him your work?
Uh, I think I'd be pretty confident because, it's almost like, the same thing with like talking about your artwork. If you've gone through the journey and experimented and messed things up and got to a point where you're like, oh, I can see my progression and how everything took me to this point, and you feel original about yourself. I think that he would recognize that because, he had his hands in a little bit of this and a little bit of that. He was very traditional with a lot of the stuff. But, I think all artists kind of appreciate people with a story and that don't just say, oh, I just paint for money. You know what I mean? Because clearly he was somebody that was just in love with creativity and art. And so I think that stuff transcends all of us artists that are passionate about it,
Yeah, yeah. And if he were around for, say, 15 minutes, I mean, that's all the time you had, what one question would you ask him?
But I mean, I think you always want to know about if he is somebody that did his whole life, it seems, revolved around art. From where he lived, everything about what he did, it was about art. And almost I'd love to be able to ask him if that was satisfying enough for him. If because we all go through hard times when you're living off of your art and things like that. Maybe I'd love to get an insight if that mattered to him, because I don't think he made a lot of money, but I think that he was respected within those communities and got through life doing what he wanted to do, just to get that insight of, and then I tell him to pick up a brush and let's go paint.
Yeah, that would be great. So what I'm going to need from you is going to be as much of a bio as you can, as much ephemera as you can, the newspaper articles and so on and so forth. We'll load that up. It'll be a tribute to him, and it'll be very, very cool to see this happen.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I thought I had Faber-Castells. I was gonna see if this was.
Oh, wow, I
Boston
remember
Maki.
those.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember.
Oh, actually, I have these. Hold on.
Those are Ticonderogas.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little lower.
Those.
Oh yeah. Are those from him?
No. They're just from like a flea market find.
Wow. Brings back memories.
Well, I thought when you were saying that, I was like, oh, I might have those exact ones here.
Yeah, the turquoise ones with the brass. They have erases on them. There's like caps on them.
Right.
Yeah, and it is weird what does spur us on to do what we do. There's so many reasons for it. This is fantastic. Anything else that you would like to let people know about before we close out?
If they do have any other information or happen to, discover that they have some of his artwork, he always signed it with Yellenti and would put a little red dot next to it.
What was the red dot for?
I don't know. It wasn't on everything that he did. But the stuff that was from like probably about like the 50s on, all of his oil paintings all had Yellenti and a red dot next to it. And I don't know what that meant. It might have just been his thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool. Or maybe he was way ahead of the curve on the red dots.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe or maybe he did that if they were sold. I have no idea.
Because that's another thing too. I mean, as you're signing your work now, my signature is a scrawl, but I'm the only one who knows what the hell that means. So
Yeah, mine is too.
I bought a rubber stamp to put, because I don't want to be printing my name on everything. That's, almost impossible. And now I've got to start figuring out how to identifying the work from the front, because one of the biggest things as an abstract painter, or even as not as an abstract painter, the signature can carry weight in an entire composition. I mean, you put the wrong color, the wrong size, the wrong thickness in the bottom right-hand corner, for example, and all of a sudden, you didn't compensate for the rest of the composition. Your eyeball's going to go straight there.
Yeah.
So
the whole surface. No, it's true.
It's not easy. I came up with what I call a chop. Actually, it was my grandson that came up with that concept. But even then, I mean, it's fine, because if that's my chop. But what happens if years from now is like, what the hell does this red stamp thing mean?
Yeah.
Just like, what's that red dot mean?
Yeah, right. Exactly. The mystery continues.
The mystery continues. That's true. This has been fun. I mean, this has been
Definitely
a lot of fun. And thanks for being kind of the guinea pig for the dead artists. I mean, let's face it, that's really what it's called. I mean, we call them historical artists, but it's really dead artists. And just speaking about him, there's an African proverb that says, when the last person that remembers you dies, you die again.
Yeah.
So the idea is obviously to keep that memory going, because the Egyptians didn't waste all that time and energy moving those big blocks of stone for nothing. They wanted to make sure that you weren't forgotten, and the biggest punishment that they could give you was to erase you from history.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah.
So Mark, this has been great. Hold on, I'm gonna do the closing out. I just want to hang on for a couple of minutes after we stop recording. All right.
Yeah, sure thing.
Thank you so much. One more time, we'd really like to thank Mark Carvalho, aka Boston Maki. And if you want to know where that comes from, go check out his podcast. It's episode 77, I believe. Okay. And he brought us our first, and I'm trying to do this respectfully, our first dead artist, our first historical artist, his great uncle, Nicholas Yellenti. And we thank him so much. We're brought to you by the Artist Index podcast. It's brought to you by the Artist Index, and it's sponsored by the great folks at Heavenly Spirits Imports. And if you want to follow the example of Mark or Maki, please contact us. We want to hear about your relatives, acquaintances, friends who you can resurrect and give them another breath of life. Thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.